Hey everyone, welcome to Food Talk Live. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. I'm really excited today because I get to talk to somebody I should have been able to meet a few months ago, but I couldn't go to this amazing event she had for this foundation that she works for. Chandani Punia is the Director of Development and Program Innovation at the Akshaya Patra Foundation's USA branch. And the foundation does some incredible work across India, providing nutritious meals to students. They are currently working to provide meals for those impacted by COVID-19. During normal times, they're serving about 1.8 million meals in nearly 20,000 schools across the country. So again, really doing incredible work to provide nutritious, diverse meals across India. So I'm so glad I could finally see you in person and that we can have this conversation. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get into the whole how COVID-19 is impacting India and especially school children, I'm wondering if you can give an overview of the foundation's work, because although it should be more well known here, in my opinion, and our co-founder's opinion, Brittany Pollock, I think a lot of people don't know about this incredible work that you're doing. So if you could just sort of give us a synopsis, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So I work for the Akshaya Patra Foundation. We are headquartered in Bangalore, India. And we started about 20 years ago with providing meals for 1,500 children. That has grown, as you mentioned, to 1.8 million children every day.
Wow.
We have 54 kitchens that prepare these meals from scratch. So we source the raw materials, grains, vegetables. They get sorted, cooked, prepared in our kitchens and get delivered to the 19,000 schools that are surrounding our kitchens in customized vehicles. And the cook to consumption time is under 6 hours. And we do this every school day for 1.8 million children.
It's amazing. And so you source the ingredients locally. So you have to interact with farmers and farmers markets and other markets.
Yeah, so Akshaya Patra is part of the government's midday meal program. And so a lot of we also get government subsidy, and that usually comes in the form of grains and raw materials. So some of that is coming from the government, but a lot of the vegetables we're largely sourcing from local farmers. So we have very strong supply chains set up in India. We've worked with organizations like GAIN and others, in fact, to talk about food fortification and things like that.
That's exciting. We'll have GAIN on later this week, as a matter of fact. So that amount of scaling up, I mean, 20 years, it doesn't, it seems like a long time, but it's not. So to go from, 1,500 meals per day to 1.8 million meals per day, that's quite a feat. So the scale of this, I think, is kind of incomprehensible, especially to folks in the United States, because we just can't imagine the scope and breadth of India, in our heads.
Right. Yeah. And, I think that, so Akshaya Patra is providing 1.8 million meals daily, but the total need for the midday meal program is 120 million children. So there's the government and actors like Akshaya Patra and other NGOs that are working together in partnership to address the need for school lunches for these children. A lot of the kids that come to the government and government-aided schools come from families that are making less than $5 a day.
Right.
So we're not sure what they're accessing the night before or if they've had breakfast that morning, which is why the midday meal is such an important intervention for these children.
So often it's the only meal they're eating per day.
Yeah.
And that's similar to what happens, unfortunately, even in countries like the United States, where kids who, were receiving a midday or free school lunch now are not getting that. So many school districts here have had to sort of ramp up, how they feed children during this critical time. So I feel like there's a lot to be learned from what your foundation has done in terms of, ways that Americans and other people in the global north can really learn from you.
Yeah. And so I think the need that we're addressing is there are two needs. So one is just given the landscape of hunger and food insecurity in India, where 3,000 children are dying every day of hunger, 60 million children are undernourished, the need for one good midday meal is so important. But for us, the point of intervention is the schools, because we know that when we provide a midday meal, it incents the parents to send their children to school.
Right.
And in the Indian context, where you have poverty, illiteracy, and food insecurity working together and against really human development, it's very important to marry those two and address it through a simple, hot, nutritious meal for children.
Right. And I think there's a lot of incentive for parents to send their girl children to school who maybe normally wouldn't attend. Is that correct?
That's right. And I think that the female child in India particularly has a set of challenges that are related to cultural and gender norms. So what we find is that if a family had to choose to send one child to school, it's probably going to be the male child. Right. So often female children are asked to stay home to look after their siblings or do work around the house while their parents go and work in the informal sector. So there's a lot of barriers for girls, especially to access education. Nutritionally as well, it's very important for girls, especially in early adolescence, to have good access to food and nutrition. So against those set of challenges, we find that when we provide the meal for parents, it's almost like a cash transfer for the girls' portion of the food. So they feel motivated to send their children, especially girls, to school.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the sort of meals that are being prepared. I know it's probably hard when there are 1.8 million being served every day, but what kind of meals are they? You mentioned the grains and the vegetables, but what does this sort of look like?
Sure. So the meals are, they kind of suit the cultural preference. So just to give you an example, we have kitchens in the North Indian cuisine is very heavy on dal, which is lentils, a vegetable, and rotis. So our kitchens have these custom roti machines that produce thousands of rotis within hours.
Wow.
In the South, there's a cultural preference for rice. So we have machines that cook rice using steam. And so we try to adjust the food that we made to the cultural palate. So the food would resemble what a child might eat at home or what they're used to seeing their mother prepare at home. So typically at lunch, we'll have rice or roti, some sort of lentil, a vegetable, and they receive dessert once a week.
Oh, that's great. It's always good to have a treat. I mean, I think that cultural element of this is so important because often what happens, especially when something is free, it's not culturally relevant. It doesn't fit sort of the norms of a particular community or a particular region. So I think that's such an important part of what your foundation is doing.
Yes, and what we find is that the parents, the teachers and the students are very engaged with the meal, which I find fascinating. I ran human-centered design workshops last year with support from the Ford Foundation, and we were trying to understand what the child's journey looks like before school and after school, right, because there's just so much we don't know about these children that we're serving. And what we found when I did these sessions with the children was how engaged they were with the food and the lunch. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lovely experience because culturally too, the importance of the meal in India is so much. And to be able to sit together as a community and enjoy the same food is very important in the lives of these children. And it's all food that they recognize and relish.
Right. Right. And it's delicious. I mean, it sounds good to me. I mean, I love Indian food, but it sounds delicious.
Yeah. In fact, our staff in Bangalore, where our headquarters are, everybody eats Akshaya Patra meals at office, at work.
That's wonderful. So obviously, there's much greater need now in India and in many other countries because of COVID-19. And I imagine your whole system of how meals are prepared and delivered is really changing, and it's probably changing from day to day. Can you talk about what's been happening?
Sure. So I think that the biggest change for us was when the government announced the national lockdown. That was towards the end of March. And what that meant for us was that schools were closed. With schools being closed, our point of intervention where we deliver our meals was going to be closed. So that was a very critical moment in our programming. But Akshaya Patra has previously done a lot of disaster relief and food relief work. So we quickly pivoted and kept some of our kitchens open to provide meals to basically anyone in need. And the people that we're seeing most in need in India at the moment are workers in the informal sector, which is 80% of India's workforce. So that's 400 million people in need.
Repeat that again.
It's 80% of India's workforce and 400 million people in need.
Wow.
And their families. So we quickly worked with partners on the ground and the government to keep our kitchens open. And we prepared and delivered meal to basically anyone who was in need. So normally where our meals would go to schools, we now just took our meals to delivery points identified by the government where we could safely deliver and distribute meals to migrant laborers, their families. We've also partnered with others on the ground to do food relief kits, which is not something we normally do, but we have done in the past in an emergency setting. So we're doing that. And I'm happy to report that we have now, since the lockdown on March 24th, we've delivered 50 million meals to people in need.
Amazing. Congratulations. Can you describe more about these food relief kits and what they entail?
Sure. So what we tried to do was we tried to do grocery boxes. What they had were lentils, some sort of grain like rice or flour, depending on the region, some fruits and vegetables, so that families who do have access to a kitchen and cooking infrastructure can safely prepare and enjoy those meals at home with their families. We did that, so it had a supply for over 2 weeks so that they could do it at home. This started when the lockdown period was just announced. So we thought it was going to be 2 weeks, but it has now since been extended. So we're continuing to do the food relief kits because it's a safe way for people to just grab their box and leave. But that's not a reality for a lot of the informal workers who've been stranded in urban cities. So for them, we prepare the meals and serve them fresh.
Right. And let's dig a little more into that, because I think it's hard for folks to understand what sort of the informal sector means. Often these folks are living in urban areas. They don't have access to a lot of things, but often they don't have their own kitchens, and
that's right.
They eat street food because that's what's available, and it's often less expensive. So
that's right.
Paint a picture of what this really looks like.
Sure. So yeah, I think people in the informal sector would be those that are not under any sort of work formal contract or protected under any rights of the employer. A lot of them are not even registered to receive government benefits, so they're extremely vulnerable. If you were to visit India, these would be the construction workers that you see, rickshaw drivers, people who have their own small businesses, vendors who are selling fruits and vegetables in big cities. A lot of agriculture workers. Agriculture is largely informal. So anyone who's a farmer, farming family, especially if they don't have access to their own land, they are particularly vulnerable.
Absolutely.
So if you were to go to India, it's practically the majority of the population that you see on the street is extremely vulnerable in general, and now they have been made more vulnerable because of the virus. We heard some accounts of people, our beneficiaries who we were serving, about their experience with COVID, and a lot of them were not fearing the virus more than they were fearing just hunger.
Right.
And food for their families, and that's an immediate concern for them.
Absolutely. And we've talked a lot about how, your programs often ensure that girls go to school and that kind of thing, but women in the informal sector are often, they experience a lot of issues, including sexual harassment. They can't, they don't have the same education as many men. But during this time especially I feel like women are more affected than ever because they are, the cooks and the gatekeepers of nutrition, and not being able to go to markets and get food is I'm sure pretty problematic.
Yeah, and there's another feature, which is generally women will always have coping strategies that are more severe than men. We see it in the hunger season. In times of crisis, the women and girls will often eat last. I mean, this is usually happening on a daily basis culturally. So you just see them really missing out on those nutrients and calories in the home. And certainly everything you described about just general gender inequalities, and women also bearing the disproportionate burden of housework.
Right.
And during this time when everyone's home, just the extra pressure on keeping a safe sanctuary and making sure food is available and peace at home is a daunting task, especially when you're hungry.
Very daunting for sure. And we've also heard of cases of domestic violence, in places like the United States.
That's
and
right.
Rising. So it's women are more at risk and very vulnerable during this time for lots of reasons.
That's right.
But I want to make sure that we're, women are not victims in these situations. They are often the folks who are, diving right in and trying to solve some of these problems. And I want to pivot a little bit and talk about sort of the infrastructure that the foundation has built and who is providing these meals. I imagine the cooks are women. And a lot of the work that's being done in these kitchens, the 54 kitchens around the country, is being done by women. Is that correct?
That's right. So we have, of our workforce, about 40% are women, which in the context of India is a very impressive number. When you go to the kitchens, a lot of the employees are women who are sorting the grains, making sure that any raw materials we're receiving are free from contaminants. They're cutting and prepping the vegetables, and a lot of them are informing the menus. So in some of our decentralized kitchens, we're hiring self-help women groups to do the cooking and the preparing. I will say with the fleet, it's largely men who drive the trucks and the delivery vehicles to the schools. And I just want to explain how the distribution process works. So we prepare and deliver the meals to schools. Once the food vessels are in the school, teachers who are mostly women in the education system in India will collect those vehicles and then distribute the meals to the children. And children volunteers actually are the ones serving the meals to their fellow classmates, which is really lovely.
That is lovely. That is so lovely. I know you're also, the Akshaya Patra is also doing other sorts of efforts at schools and in communities around things like solar energy and minimizing food waste and processing waste. Can you talk a little bit about those efforts as well?
Sure. So given our enormous scale in India, we're quite acutely focused on greening our supply chain. And this means a few things. So we try to make sure that our vehicles are very fuel efficient. If there's any sort of waste, organic waste, we have sort of biomass conversion so that we can use clean energy, not rely on coal. We compost any food waste as well. And the kitchens are so efficient that once the sorting of the grains is done, pretty much everything gets utilized. And because human hands are not really touching the cooking process, all the food gets directly inserted into the food vessels. And I'll share a video, and perhaps you can share one just so that it's more visual for those that are listening. But there's really not, when you go to the kitchen, you don't really see a fallen potato or a carrot on the floor. Nothing falls, everything gets prepared. Right. And because we allow children to take second or third helpings, we don't really see a lot of food waste coming out of the school at the point of consumption.
That's great. That's wonderful.
So there's many different ways in which we look at sort of, sustainability. You also talked about other programs that we're doing for the children. So our main sort of point of intervention is the school lunch. but we are always piloting different ways to help our students and their families. And a few examples of that are, we have a small scholarship program that provides money to qualified students so that they can stay in school and they don't have to drop out of school to help their families with work. We also offer connections to health clinics. We have one pilot program in Jaipur, which provides meals at a nominal cost to daily wagers. So if you are the construction worker, you can show up and buy lunch at a very low cost,
Right.
because often they're far away from home. They're traveling long distances to show up at the workplace and not enough money to buy food. So we have different programs that we try to do for the families as well.
Yeah, that's a very holistic way of approaching the work that you do, not just looking at the kids, but sort of thinking bigger picture about their parents and about their sort of future, schooling. I think that's amazing. So you work for the U.S. arm of the foundation. How are you connected to what's happening in India?
Sure. So the US arm is primarily the fundraising arm. Our mandate is to generate awareness and support for our efforts in India. We have a very big Indian diaspora in the US, but it's really for anyone who's interested in development challenges in India. Because these challenges are not unique to India. I think most countries that are trying to meet the sustainable development goals are grappling with food security and education. So our main mandate is to generate awareness. And we do this a few different ways. We have events and galas to invite people and just spread awareness. As you mentioned, it is true that we're this massive organization in India, but we're really desperate to get our word out, and we want the world to know about what we do. Because our technology in the kitchens, we operate on an open innovation model. So we welcome other countries and organizations to look at how we prepare food and share that for social good. So we have special events, and we have a platform that's called Tap Forums, which is a series of talks, workshops, and seminars to get people who want to not just donate money, but their time and expertise to solving development challenges in India. So that's a really exciting way in which people who are here in the US or internationally can participate in our cause in India.
That's great. That's great. I just want to give out your website real quick, foodforeducation.org, so folks, our viewers and our listeners can learn more. And I think that idea of bringing other experts in and being sort of very open source, if you will, about it is so unique to what you do, because it's not proprietary in any way. You're sharing this so that others can learn from it.
That's right. And we're really focusing on inclusive innovation, making sure that the communities that we serve, as well as our stakeholders that, provide funds for the work in India or their time and effort, are part of our journey to come up with solutions for those we serve. So it's a really great way to cultivate ideas. Last year we were at the EAT Forum, and we did a small workshop with 15 experts to talk about ideas on how we can make the lives better for three types of personas, or three, let's say, children, unique children. And we generated some 169 ideas in just 3 hours, many of which actually we piloted, including a breakfast program, which we did this year.
That's fantastic. And I like how you referred to it as a journey. You're not saying this is the answer. This is part of a sort of a toolkit of answers.
That's right.
That's
yeah, I mean, definitely. I think it requires coordination. It requires awareness, and for everyone to be involved and know about the challenges. We've done food preparation and delivery really well, and we are very open to other ideas on how we can help these communities more.
Well, that on that point about coordination, when you're working with a government as large and probably as complex as India's, I'm sure there are many challenges. Do you want to address some of how that works? It must be an immense, undertaking.
Yes, and I think that a large part of the success of our scaling was technology and an amazing team in India, but also our partnership with the government that really allowed us to scale. So the Indian government mandated right to food and right to education, and the midday meal program was put into place in 2001. And so when that happened, Akshaya Patra became an obvious partner to then reach all the people, all the children in need. There are challenges working with, I think, any stakeholder group. We are lucky to have a staff where we have dedicated positions for a government liaison. Some of the challenges that we do face are getting land permissions to construct our kitchens. I think that's the biggest challenge. But the government has been a great partner to us, and we've been able to not just scale up during normal circumstances, but then be called upon when there's a COVID crisis happening on the ground. And it's really it's not. I think what I really appreciate is that despite the political party or the politics in India, it does not affect our work. So Akshaya Patra has not missed a single day of service since we started 20 years ago. And I think it's our ability to kind of help remind the government that when we succeed, they succeed. When the children are fed, India's future labor force succeeds. 40% of the workforce is under 18. So we're really nourishing India's future with our work. So I think keeping that at the forefront really helps us keep good relationship at various level, at the federal, the state, and the local level.
That's amazing. Yeah, nourishing young minds, because they are the future, and if we don't do it now, the consequences of that later on will be more tragic than even what we're experiencing now with COVID-19. Because when you have a generation of undernourished or malnourished children who are stunted, it's not good for the country. It's not good for their families. It's not good for communities. It's not good for anyone.
That's right.
Again, you can go to foodforeducation.org. So I know that you, like all of us, are hunkered down and have probably no travel plans anytime soon. But I'm wondering if there is someone on the ground in India who inspires you and sort of keeps you going during this crisis.
An Akshaya Patra, somebody on the ground, or just in general?
Somebody in general. I mean, I don't know if you still have family there, but asking, folks who inspires them during such a sort of tragic and confusing time.
Yeah, so maybe I'll name two people. The first is from Akshaya Patra, our CEO, Sridhar. He's full of energy, so calm. He's calm no matter what the crisis at hand is. So I think that he's really inspiring, and really our kitchen staff and the whole team. I mean, it's a very scary time to be working and going to work, and I think they just inspire me because they show up to work every day to make sure that children are fed. At a personal level, I'd say my mom inspires me. She is very optimistic. So I know when I'm having a low day here in Brooklyn, she reminds me how fortunate I am, and just puts things into perspective.
That's great. I'm glad you have those kind of people, both the energy and the optimism in your life. I think that means a lot to all of us right now. Thank you again for joining me. It's really been so inspiring to hear about, all of the work that you're doing. So thank you for your time. And I hope everyone will also listen to this on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. And please join me on our next episode when I'll be talking to Maureen Maruka from CARE International. Thank you so much. Please stay well.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care.